Sri Lankans are casting their ballots in a snap general election. The polls will determine whether or not the island nation wants to further empower its new president, Anura Kumara Dissanayake. Now, as Sri Lanka struggles to recover from a crushing financial crisis, Dissanayake seeks to secure a majority in the parliament to push his policies. The voting began at 7 a.m. local time and will end at 4 p.m. with counting scheduled to start shortly after. In the latest, the Commissioner General of Elections has said that the first election results will be released by 10 p.m. today. The final results are expected by Friday evening. Now, there are 225 parliamentary seats on the ballot. 17 million voters of the island nation will be exercising their right on Thursday, with over 8,800 candidates contesting the election. The parliamentary election process has certain special provisions to it. Of the total of 225 seats in the parliament, Sri Lankans vote directly for 196 seats. For the remaining 29, political parties elect lawmakers on the basis of national vote percentage of every party. Now, just days after he was elected as the president, Dissanayake had dissolved the parliament on September 24th to clear the way for the general election. The parliament's 5-year term was due to end in August of 2025. But the polls seemed necessary for Dissanayake's National People's Power Party, as the NPP currently has just 3 lawmakers in the outgoing parliament, as per the 2020 mandate. Now, the president hopes for a fresh mandate that he needs to push his policies. His main challenger is Sajith Premadasa's SJB, which currently holds 54 seats. This time, several big faces have stepped away from the spotlight. Ranil Wickremesinghe, who lost the presidential elections to Anura Kumara Dissanayake, will not be contesting an election for the first time since 1977. The Rajapaksa brothers, Mahinda and Gotabaya Rajapaksa, who were ousted from power after the 2022 economic crisis, are also not participating in the electoral contest. Joining us live on the broadcast now are Dr. Rajni Gamage, Research Fellow of the Institute of South Asian Studies. He joins us live from Colombo. Also with us, our correspondent Dasuni Athauda from Colombo again. Dasuni, let me first go across to you. You last told us about a rather underwhelming voter turnout. The polling is about to close in some time now. What is the ground situation right now?
Well, the situation remains largely the same. The turnout is quite low. But according to the latest we've received, many areas have now crossed that 50% voter turnout mark. However, in comparison to the percentages that we received at this point in time for the presidential election, yes, in comparison, this election appears to have a lower turnout by 10 to 15% as of right now. But we have 1 more hour to go, and the final percentages of these voter turnouts will be tabulated by around 5 to 6 p.m. we hope. And we will know at that particular time whether the voters have actually caught up to previous percentages.
Dasuni, tell us about the security arrangements that have been put in place.
Well, there are a number of security officials who are currently being placed at individual polling stations, along with the police as well as the military. And they've made it very clear and easy for all voters, along with those like us, international and local media, to be at these polling stations and report, and also made it a clear and a smooth process for the voters to come into these polling stations, cast their votes and securely leave as well.
All right, let me now go across to you now, Dr. Gamage. Thanks for patiently waiting. We just heard that ground report from our correspondent. Now, Dissanayake needs a 2/3 majority in the parliament in order to pass laws and his policies. His party currently only has 3 seats. Now, our correspondent told us about a rather underwhelming voter turnout and explained to us how at least 60 to 70% turnout was required for the outcome to go Dissanayake's way earlier. Now, our guest on one of our shows earlier also suspected that while Dissanayaka's party might get a majority, it might still not get a sweeping majority. How do you compare the election day today to what the pollsters were predicting?
Yes, I think that as the previous correspondent mentioned as well, voter turnout being low in this the parliamentary elections, it could actually be quite positive for the NPP because we expect the number of voters that do end up turning for these polls to actually be those who are more closely aligned or supporting of the current government. In the last elections, we saw low numbers turning up at the presidential elections, and we diagnosed this largely to be because of the anti-establishment anger that had gathered up to that moment. And with the presidential elections having released that anger to a large extent, we do see the low voter turnout still being skewed more favorably towards the NPP.
Okay. Now, President Dissanayake has assured of resorting to quote-unquote alternative means to the severe austerity measures introduced by Wickremesinghe, keeping in line that these elections will measure the support of non-elite constituencies in Sri Lanka, especially among the working people and sections of the middle class who are affected by the financial crisis. Landmark elections for Sri Lanka. What route do you think the president should take should his party win?
That's an interesting question because there is the option, as you said, of the decision of the path that the president should take and then the path that is open to the president. Because as we know, Sri Lanka is still only a couple of years in the aftermath of the 2022 economic crisis. We saw the President Dissanayake, when he assumed power in late September this year, he did continue with the IMF program and he even continued with many of the appointments of the past government. And so while the NPP and President Dissanayake appear to be very committed to lessen the transfer of the costs of the reforms program and the austerity measures that have followed, while there is a clear commitment to lessen that burden being offloaded to the poorer, more vulnerable sections of the population, the limits of the options open to Sri Lanka might make alternative less hardships, a route of less hardships harder for President Dissanayake to pursue.
So, Dr. Gamage, do you see the election going the president's way?
Yes, certainly. I think it's compounded with two factors. As I mentioned before, the anti-establishment anger and hope that was expressed at the last presidential elections, that momentum we see to continue because the parliamentary elections follow very closely from the last elections. At the same time, we have noticed and observed that the opposition parties, as you mentioned, the former main opposition party, the SJB, as well as the Gas Cylinder Alliance, these parties have been largely delegitimized by the 2022 crisis. And despite these parties being more experienced in governance, because of the NPP's portrayal of these groups as belonging to an old guard that has been part of corruption and economic mismanagement and thus leading the country to economic crisis, this has largely delegitimized and reduced their chances. So I think we do expect the NPP to secure at least a simple majority in this election.
Right. Dr. Rajni Gamage, thank you so much for your time. Thank you, Dasuni, for joining us again with those updates. For all the latest news, download the WION app and subscribe to our YouTube channel.